powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast will join us momentarily here on 97.3 ESPN. We have Geoff Mosher now here on Football at 4 as we are 50 days from the start of the NFL season. A week away, basically, from training camp. At this point next week, the Eagles will be, well, they'll at least be running around. They're not going to have pads on for a while, but we got Geoff Mosher now, Football at 4, here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, welcome back. How you doing today?
I'm great, Josh. How are you? I hope you're anxiously awaiting the start of training camp, like we all are. Although
I'm so
like all the time, it's like it fast forwards our summer, but hey, that's all right.
Well, I'm so anxiously awaiting. I've been watching the quarterbacks on Netflix, that documentary, and I'm actually getting to the point where I'm starting to like Kirk Cousins. So,
all right, you need to put the Netflix down.
Have you watched any of it?
No, people keep telling me it's great. I'm going to try to quickly binge it before we get into training camp. I'm actually just finishing up. Earlier, like a month or two ago, I watched the whole Tom Brady thing, the Man of the Arena, which has to be a couple of years old now, right?
Right.
And I was watching the Derek Jeter one, the captain. So I'm sort of now catching up on really old but compelling sports content, and pretty soon I'll get to like the quarterback.
I personally liked the Jeter better than the Brady one.
100%. I sort of got bored with the Brady thing about 4 episodes in.
Yeah, the Brady one felt like I was rehashing a lot of things I already knew. Yes,
I agree. Whereas the Jeter thing, you learn a lot about his background that I don't think everybody really knew about. So it's nice. It's good.
See, I think that the quarterbacks on Netflix thing is getting some bad reviews online by certain people. I think it's very insightful. I'm only about 3 episodes in, Geoff, but let me just give you my quick takeaways. One, I don't hate Patrick Mahomes' wife anymore. That's the first thing. Because if you see her on social media, she is probably the most hate-the-face person online at this point.
Yeah, she never really bothered me as much as other people, but I think because you have to be like sort of the diehard passionate fan and sort of get annoyed by the antics. It didn't bother me as much, but I always could see how somebody else would be bothered by it.
The second thing I learned is that Kirk Cousins' offensive line is so bad he probably played through about 4 injuries last year that nobody knew about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment. It's gotten a lot better. Their left tackle, Darisaw, is a pretty good blindside protector in this league, and see if looks year, and then he sort of rounded into form. We'll see if what they've done on offense has made them in more position to not just be a regular something in the playoffs, but that has been an area that they've tried to fix for a long time, and Kirk needs that.
Third thing I learned is that Marcus Mariota's ego is a lot smaller than I thought, and he might be the least egotistical quarterback in the NFL.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. Now, you're ruining some of this for me, Josh. I want to go watch it myself. You're telling me all these interesting tidbits.
I'm not giving you the real good stuff. I'm keeping that for the Netflix. You can watch it on your own. There's some interesting stuff in there I didn't even tell you. I just gave you my 3 takeaways on each guy.
All right. Well, it doesn't surprise me that Marcus Mariota is a humble guy. I kind of always thought he presented himself that way. I don't know if you felt different. I know some people may have sort of him last year, the way he left the Falcons after he lost his starting job and thought maybe he was becoming an egomaniac. But for most of his career, I think he's kind of presented him. He's been.
Yeah, the way he left the Falcons, I think that's actually the biggest twist of the show so far. When you get to that point, you're gonna kind of be like, now it all makes sense. You know what I mean? It's gonna be a little full circle for a lot of people out there. So I'll save that for everybody. All right, Geoff, let's get to the Eagles because they're going to be in camp next week, and you and Andrew DeCecco wrote about over at InsideTheBirds.com. I want to ask you about one of your notes, because in your guys' article about new blood, you talk about the off-ball linebacker, and in a league where linebacker has been, de-emphasized for the Eagles, linebacker is still an important conversation. Why, Geoff Mosher?
Well, I guess it's an important conversation because of how they've de-emphasized it, right? I mean, for years, it's a carousel position for them, to the point where a couple of years ago, I mean, they're basically just pulling in and out guys who are either undrafted free agents or really, I mean, at one point it was like Nate Gary and Duke Riley and a young TJ Edwards who had not yet really, become what he was last year. Now, I think that they sort of reignited the fan base last year by doing two things. One, drafting Nakobe Dean. That was very good. In the third round, at least it gave them somebody to look forward to and hope that that would be their next sort of Jordan Hicks type play, like a longer-term linebacker who has a lot of skills and abilities. But then number two is that they've found a combination in TJ Edwards and Kaiser White who managed to hold their starting job down from front to end and play at a high level, especially TJ Edwards, in a way that we haven't really seen from Eagles linebacker. So I sort of wrote in that piece that, the Eagles would love last year to be the new norm for them, but it's kind of hard for it to be the new norm when guys have years like that, and then you say goodbye to them, and then you go kind of back to your carousel approach. But that's where Nakobe Dean comes in, and what they hope and what the fans hope and everybody hopes is that he winds up being the player that, you saw at Georgia.
Speaking of the player he was at Georgia, how do the fans separate their expectations of him from what is really going to happen with Nakobe Dean? Because let's be realistic, he was a stud at Georgia. He was an All-American and all these different accolades, but in the NFL, he still has to learn the game. He's still young.
Right. He didn't play that many snaps last year. And when he was at Georgia, played on, an unbelievable defensive front seven that had so much talent. And, of course, he's reunited with two guys, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, that he played with, and that's what sort of the Eagles are hoping to accomplish here. But in order for him to, I think, do his job to the fullest, the front line has to as well, and that includes Jordan Davis. And the reason why he's a third-round pick is because if you look at his build, you look at his frame, look at the way he plays the game side to side. I mean, he's not a downhill linebacker. Those are few and far between anyway, but he's also not just like a Fred Warner type of specimen either. I mean, he's as smart, instinctive. He is a good athlete. I'm not taking that away from him, but he was at his best because he was kept clean and he was able to make tackles. So that really starts up front. And so the Eagles have to be a team that can keep their linebackers clean in order for their linebackers to succeed. You're not going to get like Jeremiah Trotter type of, performance where you're just so big and strong and you can out-muscle guards and tackles coming at you.
Geoff Mosher joining us on the Elite Accurate Hotline for Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com. Geoff, the other guy that we should touch on is probably the guy that most people forget is even on the roster, and that's Nick Morrow. He was kind of the forgotten man of free agency, but he very well may be the most important guy in this conversation because Nakobe Dean, for all intents and purposes, has a role in this team. But Nick Morrow, the free agent addition, he's still technically competing for a job here.
Yeah, Nick Morrow made over 100 tackles last year for the Bears defense. Now, I like to say that can be a misleading number, right? If you're making 100 tackles, but they're all 10 to 15 yards downfield, then the numbers look better than the actual performance. And the fact that he comes here and he agreed to a contract with $0 guaranteed dollars is a little bit of a red flag. But it gives the Eagles the ability to say, hey, you're here to compete for a job, and we have another guy in Christian Ellis who we're going to take a look at as well, and we're going to let the best man win, or we're going to go with Nick Morrow and then see how that works. And if he's not doing what we asked, then we'll hopefully coaching Christian Ellis up to take the spot. That's sort of been how it's been for the Eagles up until last year, right? I mean, how many times did they start the season with one linebacker, whether it was Nate Gary or whether it was, who was the guy 2 years ago, Eric Wilson, right, or somebody else. And then by mid-season, they were on a different linebacker. So the recipe or ingredients could be there for that kind of maneuvering too. But the recipe is also there for Nick Morrow to do well and play behind a really nice defensive line, which he didn't have the opportunity to do last year in Chicago, and be even better this year than he was last year. And he's got great quickness. He's got great instincts. He wore the dot on his helmet, the green dot, in Chicago, because he was able to be that, guy who can see it all and diagnose. And, for a guy coming out of Greenville College, a couple of years ago, that's a feather in his cap. Done theoretically a better defense and should be able to have his best attributes capitalized. But like we said that about a bunch of one-year stopgap linebackers for the Eagles. And again, it wasn't until last year did you actually see the results you were looking for.
When you think about this defense as well, Morrow, Dean, and the linebackers, talk to the audience about what it means also to have a new defensive coordinator. Because I think we haven't talked enough. To me, one of the biggest storylines is you got a new defensive coordinator, and I understand he's going to run almost the same system as Gannon, but he's not the same person. I mean, if anybody's ever seen this guy, he don't look the same, he don't act the same, he don't walk the same. They're not alike personality-wise at all, Gannon to Desai.
No, not at all. And it's hard to tell, but I think Desai comes off a little bit more sort of salt of the earth than maybe Jonathan Gannon did. I don't want to say a bit quieter, but probably a little bit more pensive and introspective on things. But the bottom line is it's more about, not what he is in front of the cameras, but what he's going to do. And as you just mentioned, and as we've talked about a lot on Inside the Birds, Josh, that the Fangio concept that has run quite, frequently around the NFL, a lot of teams run it, including the Dolphins, who the Eagles play this year, who will actually not be, the Eagles won't be seeing the Fangio concept. They'll be seeing Vic Fangio himself when they play that game. But every Fangio disciple sort of puts their own fingerprint on the defense. There are concepts that are saying where you don't really need to rush more than 4. You're not trying to blitz. You're trying to do a lot of pre-snap, post-snap disguise. You're trying to have a good front 4 so that you can do your pre- and post-snap disguise and not worry about blitzing. But we're waiting to this is a big thing for us, right? Let's see what Sean Desai does with a defense. It's not the same defense Jonathan Gannon had, so you got to give this guy a little leniency. They're basically rebuilding the entire underbelly of it, from defensive tackle to linebacker to safety. The whole middle of the defense is rebuilt. But I'm very curious to see a couple of things. Line deployment. Does he do slanting? Does he stunt? Does he move guys around? We saw a little of that with John Gannon, but I wonder if we'll see a little bit more of that with Sean Desai. And then, what does he do on the back end to confuse quarterbacks? Because that's a big part of the Fangio concept. The post is, everybody does it the same. And by the way, he's got to learn what he can do with these guys. He hasn't coached any of them, I don't think. So I think that's what training camp is really going to be important for Sean Desai, is learning what he can and can't do with his personnel.
Although the interesting also about Desai is that, the description that he's almost like a coach's coach, like Pete Carroll thought very highly of him. Other coaches think very highly of him, of who he is and his work ethic and his intellect. And it feels like that's different too. Whereas like Gannon was hired because he was like the next up and coming guy. And Desai was hired because he's like the guy that other coaches want to have on the staff.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it, the recognition that Sean Desai had, and who had already done the job as defensive coordinator and earned some accolades for that, for how he was able to pull off the job and do well. And, we had John DeFilippo, the former Eagles quarterbacks coach, on with our Inside the Birds Patreon channels, for our Patreon members. And DeFilippo has known Sean Desai going back something like 25 odd years, back to Boston College where they were there together, to I want to say Fordham, I think it was somewhere. Is Fordham or I think it was Fordham. Either way, known each other for a long time, and Flip did a great job of breaking down what makes Sean Desai a really good defensive coordinator, what we should look for, and how Desai had learned not on just under Vic Fangio, but even before that, guys like Mel Tucker and John Fox, and did an unbelievable job kind of breaking down what we can expect from Sean Desai and why he's so smart at what he does.
Geoff, I also wanted to ask you about the other topic, not directly Eagles related, but in the NFL right now. Obviously, the hot topic this week is about the running backs. Saquon Barkley in the Eagles division doesn't sign his tender. Tony Pollard signs his tender with the Cowboys in their division. And, of course, the other guy being talked about is Josh Jacobs with the Raiders. But, the controversy is about, hey, running backs, they don't have the same value. And I feel like, Geoff, the problem I'm having reconciling is that there's a huge difference between saying, hey, Saquon Barkley shouldn't be paid like, a quarterback. I get that. But when he could potentially be making the same amount of money as DeAndre Hopkins upcoming season, and he's about, 5 years younger, it feels like a bit of a slap in the face.
I mean, it is, but I don't know how to resolve this. I don't know what the happy medium is. It's not the NFL's fault that running backs are deemed more fungible, right? And that the tag for running backs is lower than it is for other positions. I don't know. You're always going to have certain positions that don't have, like we just talked about, off-ball linebacker, right? Where the money there just doesn't match what the guys who are best at other positions are making. And I really don't know how to get around that. And I do understand I feel like the players understand that, but what they then dispute is the fairness of then, sort of the way teams will use a running back for 3 or 4 years so much and then intentionally do that to not pay them going forward. And you talk about safety of the game and ruining a guy's body. Like, these are all really valid arguments, but at the end of the day, it is a business, and this is how capitalism works, right? Where you value certain things and you don't value other things, and you spend your money where you think it has the most value, and you try to get the most you can out of a product or a commodity when it's at its lowest value. So you can buy low, sell high, right? So I don't know what the right answer is. I understand why Saquon and other running backs are upset. I also understand why NFL teams operate the way they do. I'm unfortunately not well-versed enough in labor and industrial relations to help become a good person who can settle the controversy there and find a happy medium.
So I have an idea, and I'll pitch it to you, and you can tell me if it's a good or a bad idea. So my idea, the quote-unquote fix the problem, it's not even a full fix. It's more like a way to reshuffle the deck, I guess you would say, is steal the idea from the NBA that if you hit certain tiers, like if you're an all-pro first or second team, or if you lead the league in rushing, or some sort of like attainable, objective measurement, that you automatically qualify for a certain financial tier. And if you don't hit those tiers, you don't qualify for a certain financial tier. So this way, it'll maybe cut down some of the quarterback contracts, and maybe more running backs will get paid, and so on and so forth down the line. That way, there's a little bit less arguing about, dollars and cents, and it's a little bit about, hey, man, you're first team All-Pro, you get paid this, and hey, man, you weren't even a Pro Bowler, so you can't get that money.
That sort of makes me think of what the NFLPA does, right, for undrafted players or really low-round draft picks who step into starting spots somehow as a rookie, right? They do the performance-based pay for that, and maybe there's something that the NFLPA can figure out for running backs, if that's fair, to just isolate one position where they set aside money to give to running backs who have outperformed their contracts or been used so much, even if they're first-round picks, so that they can get some kind of boost or bonus because they're so their market value is so much different than mostly every other position.
So what I'm gathering is you don't hate the idea.
Oh, no, I don't. Listen, like I said, I understand the arguments on both sides, and it would be great if something could be worked out so that there was more of a happy medium. I just think it's a very difficult thing to do when you're just playing by the rules,
Yeah, listen, I got two people at least telling me it's not a bad idea, so I'll take it for now. So Before I let you go, Geoff, I don't know if you saw, because I know you're doing a million things, but the Packers annual financial report come out, and they announced that their share of national revenue for the NFL, $374.4 million, which calculates that the NFL made almost $1 billion more this year than last year based on their revenue sharing.
Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me, Josh. It is a cash cow and the gift that keeps on giving.
I don't know what's more surprising, though. Is it the fact that the Packers still do this report every year, or the fact that the NFL only made $1 billion more than last year?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the Packers are sort of like one of the only franchise that's like a publicly owned franchise, right? So they kind of have to make those reports public.
Well, they're supposed to, but as
the NFL loves that.
Well, I mean, come on. As we know in today's world, there's a lot of stuff that's supposed to be made public that isn't made public. So,
Right.
Although apparently soon you might be able to buy a stake in the Atlanta Braves if you want to. They're talking about taking that team public.
No, not me. I don't enjoy that franchise enough to want to buy any part of it. I would love the Phillies to consider themselves the owners of the Atlanta Braves like they did in the playoffs last year.
Well, you might have to wait until the playoffs to get that. Okay, Geoff?
All right, we'll wait.
Follow him on Twitter at Geoff P. Mosher. Check out his latest coverage of the Eagles over at InsideTheBirds.com. Check out the latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast. Like, subscribe, download, give it the 5-star review. And Geoff, next week, the Eagles will be in training camp. Let's go.
Can't wait.
Geoff, take care, okay?
Yeah, bud.